Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. Pakistan's President Arif Alvi says the international community can't walk away from its obligation to help resolve the Kashmir dispute. Addressing a seminar on the eve of Kashmir Solidarity Day in Islamabad, Alvi said the world should realize that India is a belligerent and irresponsible state which could endanger regional peace. In his address, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Kashmiris are facing a threat of extermination at the hands of Indian forces. Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa says people of Kashmir and the region deserve peace. Addressing officers at the Lahore garrison, General Bajwa reaffirmed Pakistan's commitment to a just resolution to the Kashmir issue. The Army Chief called for greater vigilance and preparedness amid new challenges of hybrid warfare. The United States has urged the Indian government to resolve its differences with the farmers over the contentious laws through dialogue. The State Department said unhindered access to information, including the internet, is fundamental to the freedom of expression. This comes as international celebrities, including pop icon Rihanna and climate activist Greta Thunberg, voiced support for the farmers. A Belgian court has sentenced an Iranian diplomat for 20 years in jail for planning to bomb a meeting of an exiled opposition group near Paris in 2018. Iran condemns the decision, saying the verdict against Asadullah Assadi is illegal and clearly violates international law. Over 1,700 people have died from COVID-19 in Mexico overnight, with the death toll crossing 161,000. In Pakistan, over 1,500 people tested positive and 31 died overnight as the death toll climbs to 11,833. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.26 million lives, infecting over 104.3 million people so far. In cricket, Pakistan scored 145 runs for the loss of 3 wickets as play comes to an end on the first day of the second test against South Africa. A total of 32 overs were lost due to rain after the home side elected to bat first on a flat surface. Babar Azam and Fawad Alam steered their side to recovery after the loss of early wickets. Pakistan are leading the 2-match series 1-0. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. We begin in Pakistan. President Arif Alvi says the international community can't walk away from its obligation to help resolve the Kashmir dispute. He was addressing a seminar on the eve of Kashmir Solidarity Day in Islamabad. In his speech, he said the world must realize that India is a belligerent and irresponsible state which could endanger regional peace. The president urged the international community to hold India accountable for its atrocities in occupied Kashmir. Earlier, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Kashmiris are facing the threat of extermination at the hands of Indian forces. He said the recent report by EU Disinfo Lab validates Pakistan's stance on India's malicious designs. Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa says people of Kashmir and the region deserve peace. Addressing officers at the Lahore garrison, General Bajwa reaffirmed Pakistan's commitment to a just resolution to the Kashmir issue. His address focused on internal and external security situation of the country, as well as his vision of an enduring peace within Pakistan and the region. The Army chief apprised the officers with the latest developments in the occupied valley. General Bajwa stressed the need for greater vigilance and state of preparedness amid new challenges of hybrid warfare. Pakistan has called on the international community to take notice of Indian conspiracies in Gilgit-Baltistan. At a media briefing in Islamabad, the activist from Gilgit-Baltistan said India wants to create a division in the region. Advocate Abbas says a particular group backed by India is active in anti-Pakistan activities in Gilgit-Baltistan. He said India also wants to divide Gilgit-Baltistan. Abbas said people of Gilgit-Baltistan will never allow Indian conspiracies to succeed. Mehdi Shah Rizvi's daughter, Taiba Rizvi, said anti-Pakistan elements tried to influence her father. Now, international celebrities have shone a global spotlight on the plight of Indian farmers who have been protesting against new farm laws since November. Tweets from singer Rihanna, climate activist Greta Thunberg, and many others have set social media on fire. This has India worrying over its high-handedness. More in this report.
Why aren't we talking about this? Stand with farmers, outraged by internet shutdown. The tweets by international celebrities have created a flutter in India, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi slamming the global support to protesting farmers. Many Bollywood stars and cricketers echoed the government's stance and launched an unprecedented backlash against pop icon Rihanna and others. The raging battle on social media further ensued after Delhi police filed a case against Greta Thunberg. Responding, the climate activist said she still stands with farmers and no threat will ever change that. Meanwhile, American footballer Juju Smith-Schuster donated $10,000 to provide medical assistance to the farmers. The United States has urged New Delhi to end its differences with the farmers and resolve the matter. The protests have become the most intractable challenge for Prime Minister Modi's government. The protesters, including elderly men, women and children, have refused to budge. 175 people have died during the agitation.
Moving on, in Belgium, a court has convicted an Iranian diplomat over a thwarted 2018 bombing of an exiled opposition group outside Paris. Belgian prosecution lawyers say the Vienna-based diplomat Asadullah Assadi was guilty of attempted terrorism. Assadi has been handed a 20-year sentence, while 3 accomplices were given jail terms and were stripped of their Belgian citizenship. The ruling marked the first trial of an Iranian official for suspected terrorism in the EU since Iran's revolution in 1979. Responding, Iran slammed the Belgian court's decision and termed the judicial process and the recent sentencing as illegal. Foreign Ministry spokesman Saeed Khatibzadeh said the sentencing violates international law. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called on the international community to ensure Myanmar's military coup fails.
In an interview, the UN chief termed the reversal of elections unacceptable and called for the restoration of constitutional order. Guterres expressed hope that Myanmar's military will understand that this is not the way to move forward. The UN Security Council is also discussing a possible condemnation statement. The US says it is disturbed by reports that ousted Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi was charged following the military's takeover. State Department spokesman Ned Price repeated a call for all detained in the coup to be immediately released. Earlier, police raided San Suu Kyi's party offices and filed charges against her. She has been remanded in custody until 15 February. The charges include breaching import and export laws and possession of unlawful communication devices. Meanwhile, the army has ordered telecom companies to block Facebook services over opposition against the coup. This comes as demonstrators gathered in Myanmar's second most populous city of Mandalay.
Moving on, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says the alliance's presence in Afghanistan is a decision that must be made with consensus. At a joint presser with Belgium's Prime Minister Alexander De Croo, he urged the Taliban to stick to their commitments. He said if NATO decides to leave the war-torn country, the Afghan peace process will be put at risk. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has sharply reduced the number of American troops in Afghanistan, but the new Biden administration says it plans to review the U.S.-Taliban agreement signed last year. And in war-torn Afghanistan, half of the population is in dire need of basic humanitarian aid, but the increasing violence prevents deliveries. The EU Commissioner for Crisis Management reiterates call for a ceasefire between the Afghan government and the Taliban. More in this report.
The Afghan government and the Taliban have been negotiating a political settlement in Afghanistan. But the increasing violence in the country has dashed hopes that the U.S. brokered peace process in Doha would reduce the conflict. Meanwhile, European Commissioner for Crisis Management Jens Lenarchich called for an immediate, unconditional and comprehensive ceasefire, especially for smooth delivery of the humanitarian aid. He has visited Kabul to announce the EU will provide 32 million euros for humanitarian projects in 2021.
There are challenges with regard to the access for humanitarian work and supplies. But the international humanitarian community is working very hard on this, on improved access. It is important for all in Afghanistan, the government as well as Taliban and others, to understand that allowing for full and unimpeded humanitarian access is their obligation under international humanitarian law.
This year, even during the winter months, fighting has taken place around the country. Jens Lenarchich said that the situation of internally displaced people in Afghanistan is a matter of urgency. There has to be effective action to address their needs. He called on the government and Taliban to form an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, allowing full and unimpeded humanitarian access.
We very much hope and call for immediate, unconditional and comprehensive ceasefire in Afghanistan now, because that would increase the chances for a success of the ongoing peace process. Continued violence diminishes, on the other hand, the chances for success because it obviously hardens the positions of the two sides. That's why we call for immediate ceasefire.
EU Commissioner says that 32 million euro funds are separate from the $12 billion over the next 4 years that foreign donors, including the EU, have pledged in November.
A bipartisan group of U.S. senators has introduced a draft legislation to the U.S. Congress. They are proposing sanctions against Russia over the case of the Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. The group of 4 Democrats and 2 Republican senators reintroduced the Holding Russia Accountable for Malign Activities Act of 2021. The bill seeks to impose targeted sanctions against Russian officials complicit in Navalny's poisoning and imprisonment. The proposed legislation calls for an investigation if the Kremlin violated U.S. laws prohibiting the use of chemical and biological weapons. It also demands a report on the assassination of Russian opposition politician Boris Nemtsov. Greece and Turkey will resume talks to resolve their ongoing maritime boundary dispute in the eastern Mediterranean next month. In an interview, Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis said the two sides will meet in early March ahead of the EU summit. Mitsotakis termed the ongoing dialogue a good step in the right direction, but he said Turkey needs to be consistent in terms of its behavior. The two sides resumed talks on January the 25th after a 4-year pause and agreed to meet again in Athens. The two countries have been at odds over the distribution of energy sources in the eastern Mediterranean. Moving on, Syria says its air defense systems have intercepted Israeli missiles in the southern region. The Israeli military has declined to comment. Syrian state media said the Israeli aggression targeted Quneitra Governorate. It reported no casualties but only limited material damage. Israeli officials previously said their forces struck hundreds of Iranian targets in Syria. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. We're back. Over 1,700 people have died from COVID-19 in Mexico overnight, with the death toll crossing 161,000. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.26 million lives, infecting over 104.3 million people so far. More on the pandemic in this report.
The planet's fight against the new coronavirus is finally gaining momentum as studies show growing public confidence in vaccines, and with over 108 million doses administered already, the number of vaccinated people has exceeded the global infections tally. The UN's vaccine initiative, COVAX, has issued the list of countries scheduled to get their share from the initial 337 million doses. However, while mass immunizations rev up, the virus continues to claim tens of thousands across the globe, with the US being hit the hardest. The number of fatalities in the US has crossed 450,000, with the average daily deaths of 3,000. US Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci says the war against the pandemic is just beginning.
We have to be concerned about the mutants. Viruses will not mutate well if you don't give them the opportunity to replicate in a very large way. Namely, if you have an open playing field for the virus, they will replicate and they will mutate.
Mutant variants first found in South Africa and Brazil have now been detected in Turkey as well. The UK has initiated the first ever trials to assess the immune responses if doses of Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines are combined in a two-shot schedule. If proved viable, the mixing could improve vaccine distribution. Meanwhile, though Britain witnesses a slowdown in the spread of the disease, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned the country cannot afford to let its guard down just as yet.
And though today there are some signs of hope, the numbers of COVID patients in hospital are beginning to fall for the first time since the onset of this new wave, the level of infection is still alarmingly high.
South Korean Prime Minister has ordered a revamp of social distancing guidelines. The country's 5-tier distancing system has faced a public backlash for imposing unfair restrictions and curfews on specific businesses. China has reported 30 new COVID-19 cases, slightly up from a day earlier, but still well below the peaks seen last month.
Meanwhile, Pakistan is set to receive more than 17 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines in February under the UN-led COVAX initiative. COVAX is co-led by the WHO, the Gavi Vaccine Alliance, and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. Islamabad has already launched its nationwide immunization campaign after being gifted 500,000 doses by China earlier this week. Meanwhile, the virus has claimed 31 more lives and infected over 1,500 people overnight. This has pushed Pakistan's death toll to 11,833. The country has reported more than 550,000 cases so far, out of which almost 506,000 people have recovered. The health ministry says there are nearly 34,000 active cases in the country. South Korea has pledged to boost ties with the United States. The country's presidential office says President Moon Jae-in spoke to his U.S. counterpart, Joe Biden, over a phone call. Moon's office said the two leaders reaffirmed their commitment to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. It said the U.S. president praised the efforts of South Korea to resolve the inter-Korean conflict. Moon welcomed what he called America's return amid mounting global challenges. Meanwhile, the White House said Biden stressed his commitment to strengthening bilateral alliance and agreed to coordinate closely on North Korea. And Canada has named the far-right Proud Boys on its terror list, saying they posed an active security threat. The move comes after last month's attack on the U.S. Capitol that left 5 people dead. At a news conference, Public Safety Minister Bill Blair said the domestic intelligence was increasingly worried about the group. Blair said the concerning escalation of violence backed by activity and planning triggered the response. He added Canada will not tolerate ideological, religious, or politically motivated acts of violence.
That there has been a serious and concerning escalation of violent, not just rhetoric, but activity and planning And that's why we have responded as we have today. This update hopefully sends a strong message that Canada will not tolerate ideological, religious, or politically motivated acts of violence.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Justice Department has charged a top member of the group's Seattle chapter over the alleged role in the Capitol riots. And now moving on, the EU has rejected a UK demand to extend a grace period for checks on goods going from Britain to Northern Ireland. The bloc says the post-Brexit trade treaty gives London enough tools to solve the problems. British Minister Michael Gove and European Commission Vice President Maros Šefčovič discussed the issue over a video call. In an interview after the call, Šefčovič said that under the post-Brexit trade deal, it was for Britain to resolve the problems. However, Šefčovič agreed to work intensively with the UK to resolve difficulties impeding the deliveries of goods. Meanwhile, in a statement, Gove said he and Šefčovič would meet in London next week. The United Nations has warned of worsening humanitarian situation in Ethiopia's northern region. UNA Chief Mark Lowcock said this while addressing the Security Council virtually. Lowcock said further conflict in the country's Tigray region could trigger broader destabilization. He noted that the government controls between 60 to 80% of Tigray, leaving the rest for ethnic Amhara and Eritrean forces to operate in. Lowcock said thousands of people in Tigray still have not received help as the UN does not have unimpeded access. He said there were troubling accusations of sexual and gender-based violence in the war-torn region. The aid chief added the humanitarian situation will deteriorate if protection and aid were not quickly increased. And now SpaceX has successfully launched another set of Starlink satellites in the first of back-to-back Falcon 9 launches scheduled from Cape Canaveral. The rocket lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40 at the Space Force Station. Its payload of 60 broadband satellites separated from the rocket's upper stage 65 minutes later. The satellites can beam signals for high-speed internet service from space to paying customers around the globe. Another Falcon 9 rocket carrying a new batch of Starlink satellites will blast off from the Space Coast tomorrow. And German startup Wingcopter has joined the race to offer COVID-19 vaccine distribution by air. The company is relying on its experience in remote areas like the South Pacific Ocean nation of Vanuatu. More in this report.
The imminent arrival of COVID-19 vaccines has renewed hope that the beginning of the global recovery could be right around the corner. With the first shipments already mobilized in December 2020, the logistics sector is geared up to meet the increased demands for medical resources. Drone technology startup Wingcopter has secured fresh funding to strengthen its position and is seeking to get shots into the arms of people in hard-to-reach places.
What's special about Wingcopter is that it flies extremely fast. We set the world record with a maximum speed of 240 kilometers per hour. It can fly very far, more than 100 kilometers, with one battery charge.
The company, based in Weerstadt, south of Frankfurt, is working on several trial projects for countries in Africa and Southeast Asia. It aims to scale up operations to deliver vaccines to millions of people.
Together with UNICEF, we already delivered vaccines to various remote villages and shortened the waiting period from hours to minutes. At the time, there were vaccines for children. The knowledge from then we can now apply to the COVID-19 vaccine delivery, and we know exactly what to do to deliver these vaccines much more efficiently.
Wingcopter was founded 3 years ago, and according to the company, it has received a total of $22 million, among others from Silicon Valley-based Explorer Capital and the German state of Hesse Growth Fund Futury.
And Punjab Governor Mohammad Sarwar hails Indus News for effectively peddling Pakistan's narrative on international level. During a meeting with Indus News CEO Sania Malik in Lahore, he appreciated the channel's efforts to promote the positive image of the country. Malik said Indus News is only English-language news channel in Pakistan which is correcting the world's perception by presenting facts. She said the channel has been highlighting the Kashmir issue since its launch in 2019. The CEO also apprised the governor of the channel's role in promoting tourism in the country. And more stories after a short break. Stay with us. We're back with the latest in business. Wall Street stocks have risen slightly higher at the open following a three-day winning streak. Investors assessed a new batch of corporate earnings and economic data. The shares of Apple rose 1.5% after the news of a deal with Hyundai Kia to produce driverless cars. The stocks of online payment company PayPal gained over 6% after strong quarterly results. All the major indices have also gained steam. Meanwhile, the oil prices surged after the OPEC Plus maintained the output cuts and a drop in the U.S. crude stockpiles. In Brazil, President Jair Bolsonaro and Uruguayan President Luis Lacalle discussed the possibilities of a more flexible common market. Meeting at the Alvorada Palace in Brazil, the two leaders touted a flexible Mercosur that will allow member states to strike individual trade deals with third-party countries. Mercosur, also known as the Southern Common Market, comprises Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Talking to media, Bolsonaro termed Uruguay a partner and an important member of Mercosur. Uruguayan President Lacalle said a flexible Mercosur will allow each country to advance.
Pertenecemos al Mercosur.
We are in Mercosur and we are going to mark 30 years of the group. Just like any group, you need to review and change it. The next step in this modern world is to make it flexible so that each country can advance.
And it's time now to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.